Hey there, folks. It's still November 9th, and we're back for part two of this particular lecture. So, we're putting groundwater together with deserts, which seems kind of strange. But again, they're both kind of smaller chapters, and again, there's important stuff in them, but I'm going to kind of go over them kind of quickly. And again, definitely read this about deserts. If we did live in a desert, I might spend more time talking about this, but we don't live in a desert. And so it is important to understand some of the processes that form deserts. But again, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but definitely read the chapter so that you can see um, what's going on here. So let's jump right into it, if we will. So deserts, when we think of a desert, of course, we think of this dry, sandy place that's very, very hot. This is what most deserts are like, but not all of them. Some deserts can be very cold. So as we're going to see, places like Antarctica and the Arctic are also deserts because the idea of a desert has to do with rainfall. And if you don't get a lot of rainfall, that causes a desert. Now, yes, in Antarctica there's lots of snow, which is technically water, but rainfall itself is um, not a part of that region. So it is, in fact, a very cold desert. Um, but we know of deserts here in the United States, especially out west. We know of deserts around the world. Probably the largest is the Sahara in Africa. We'll talk about that. Excuse me. We'll talk about that in more detail here in just a little bit. But here's a location of some of the world's deserts. We can think of Saudi Arabia and we think of Iran, Iraq as being places where there's lots of desert. If you've ever been to Australia, most of the outback there is a desert. There's a desert in the southern part of Africa called the Kalahari, and there's pretty much a desert in southern South America uh, at Patagonia, which is kind of a different kind of desert, but a desert all the same. Um, and so again, these are places that are dry and usually hot. They're usually hot because of where they are located, about 30 degrees north or 30 degrees south latitude, but they can be very, very cold. So again, Antarctic and places like it in Patagonia, the desert is far enough south that it's a very cold place. Your book talks about the different types of deserts that we've already sort of hit on. Some that we haven't really talked about are deserts formed in what we call rain shadows. Rain shadows are places where you have mountains, and so as the moist water goes over the mountain, on that side of the mountain, it rains quite a bit and is fairly a forest or even a rainforest. But as the clouds going to go over the mountain, they've lost all their water. By the time they get to the other side of the mountain, there is no water, and so you have a desert situation. So you can have a mountain range, a mountain region, where on one side it's nice and wet, like up in northwestern United States. But then as the clouds go over the mountains, you can have then deserts, as we have in California. Um, so here's a map, a globe rather, that shows you these about 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south. We have kind of a desert region, and again, it's because of the way the air moves in the atmosphere. The air is heated here on the equator, therefore the heated air rises. As it cools, it all comes down. Same thing happens here. The air is coming down, and when it comes down like this, it doesn't have the moisture in it because it gets the moisture from the surface. So as it comes down, the air is dry, and we get a desert. And so that's why we see lots of deserts at about that region. Here is kind of a rain shadow where we have water going over a mountain. It's nice and lush and green and rainy over here. But by the time the air gets over the mountain, the water's gone, and we get dry air and a desert situation. So there you can live in a place where you can have a desert and uh, a rainforest literally within driving distance. Um, Then desert landscapes. There's a little bit of detail here that's not as important. It is, again, if we lived in a desert or near a desert, it would be kind of neat to understand all the different types of features. If you are planning a trip to go out west to see Grand Canyon or to see Bryce Canyon or some of the other really cool. And I suggest if you ever get a chance to do that, definitely take yourself up on it and go out there and look at the desert. We think of deserts as being desolate and nothing there, but they are absolutely fascinating places. So you should definitely plan on going out to see the desert. Of course, one of the things they do have that there is rain in the desert. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but they also have a lot of dust storms. And so you get wind that picks up dust, and especially places in Arizona, like here's one in Phoenix, where these dust storms roll in, and it is pretty amazing, apparently, how nasty they can be. It's, of course, this kind of erosion is happening, not erosion with water, but erosion with wind. And so it looks very different. And so sedimentary rock that is formed in these areas is going to look very different than sedimentary rock that's formed by way of a liquid deposition. Wind deposition can come at all different kinds of angles. Here we can see rocks that are harder sitting on top of rocks that are softer, and so the wind is eroding away the softer rock, leaving the harder rock on top. And you see lots of formations like this, which is pretty amazing. Here's a picture of Mars. We think of Mars as kind of being a desert, don't we? No rainfall, and so you can learn a lot from Mars desert as well as desert here on our planet. So again, more features that I'm not going to go into with a huge amount of detail, except to say that there is water. It does rain a lot of times in deserts, but the rain comes in such large quantities that the ground really doesn't have time to soak up the water, and so you get a lot of surface water, a lot of surface runoff, and you see features based on that kind of surface runoff. Wind is an issue. Here's Death Valley, and it was an interesting phenomenon. These rocks look like someone's been moving them, and there was a big mystery for quite some time as to what's making the rocks move, and it was discovered it was in fact the wind. So it's amazing to think that wind could blow rocks, but in fact it does, even big rocks. Again, here are some effects of that water that hits just a very large amount in a very short period of time. And of course, you can get just basic erosion, and you can see those features here. So there is a lot of erosion that's still happening in the desert, even though there's not a huge amount of water. The water they do get probably compounds the issue and causes quite a bit of erosion where we wouldn't have it before. So again, these are all very interesting features. And again, if you're going out to the desert, definitely I would look at this with more detail, and that way you can kind of understand what you're looking at as you're looking at the desert. But we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on it. I talk about the formation of the sand dune, which is really kind of cool because these dunes move around so much. It's pretty amazing and form around like literally a boulder would form a sand dune. And so this huge sand dune was actually formed by a small boulder, which is kind of incredible when you stop and think about it. There is life in deserts. There's quite a bit more life than you think. It's just that these plants and animals have adapted to the lack of water and a lot of times the high heat. And so you'll see a lot of animals come out during the night. You'll see plants that, like cacti and other kinds of succulents, that will store water so that when it does rain, they collect the water quickly. You see other plants, which are very interesting, that are flowering plants that will look like they're completely dead until there is a big rain. Then all of a sudden, in about 3 or 4 days, they will completely come back to life. They'll completely flower. They'll completely go to seed, and then be dead again. And so it's really a very interesting phenomenon. As far as problems are concerned, of course, deserts have problems with pollution, but now they have climate problems because some of the deserts are getting even more dry, and so now even plants and animals that used to live in the deserts, there's not enough water for them anymore, and so these deserts are becoming even more devoid of life and are getting bigger, spreading out. Uh, Here's a desert where in Africa, where you can see there used to be some trees growing that could live off the little bit of water, but now even they don't have enough water to survive. Here we see a large lake. It used to be a very big lake, and now it's almost just a basically a mud puddle. Here's the Sahara Desert, which is a very fascinating place because at one time the Sahara Desert wasn't a desert at all, and we have evidence that humans that evolved in Africa lived in this what was now a desert, but lived in it when it was lush forest. And so this desert is getting larger and larger as climate is changing, and it's hard to tell where that's going to end up. So we'll talk about climate change in one of the last chapters. But anyway, as you can see, climate change is affecting all kinds of different parts of the earth. Here you can see that lake that those folks were in, how big it was at one time, just not too long ago, 1973. Here's the lake in 2009, and I imagine if you looked at pictures today, there's probably not much water left at all. Here's evidence of used to be a fishing village, and now is literally boats sitting in the middle of a desert. So this is definitely an issue that we'll take up with climate change. Here's review questions for you. I believe that's page 794. And that is all we have for deserts.